In the mid-20th century, the psychological establishment operated on a specific consensus regarding infant development. Classical drive theory held that infants possessed basic physiological needs, like hunger, that required physical tending. Under this model, the mother was a secondary reinforcer, a need-gratifying object whose value to the child was thought to be a byproduct of providing food and comfort. This theory faced a major test during World War II, with the establishment of residential nurseries to care for children separated from their families. In these nurseries, the children's physiological needs were expertly met. They were fed, clean, and sheltered. Yet clinicians Anna Freud and Dorothy Burlingham documented an anomaly. Despite the high level of physical care, children frequently exhibited intense possessiveness, severe depression, and panic. Children who seemed well-adjusted would suddenly revert to frantic sobbing or fall into a state of total emotional detachment if a favored nurse was absent, even for a short time. In 1950, the World Health Organization asked Dr. John Bowlby to investigate why these homeless children were suffering such profound psychological collapse. The central question: if the mother was only a secondary reinforcer for food and shelter, why did children wither when those physical needs were still being met by others? Bowlby concluded that the mother-child bond was not a byproduct of physical care. Instead, he argued that separation from a primary attachment figure is an independent, biologically primary source of trauma. To test this, researchers Christoph Heinecke and Ilse Westheimer observed children placed in residential nurseries during family emergencies. They watched the moment of departure, when a child is left with strange staff in an unfamiliar ward. This typically triggered a phase they called protest, characterized by immediate screaming, searching for the mother, and an explicit rejection of any substitute caregivers. If the separation continued, protest gave way to despair. The children became listless, regressed in their behavior, and often lost control of previously mastered skills like bathroom training. Finally, they reached detachment. Upon reunion, these children often treated their returning mothers as total strangers, turning away or refusing to engage. While this detachment eventually broke, it was followed by weeks of intense ambivalence. The child would alternate between clinging to the mother and showing targeted anger toward her. Skeptics within the psychoanalytic community argued that this sequence wasn't caused by the mother's absence alone. They pointed to confounding variables: the frightening institutional environment, the rotating shifts of strange nurses, and the fact that many of these children were in the hospital because of illness. Because the environment was inherently stressful, researchers still hadn't proven whether the trauma stemmed from the institution or the loss of the mother figure. To test this, James and Joyce Robertson launched an experimental project designed to strip those stressors away. They placed children in a foster home with a dedicated caregiver. By removing the ward environment and rotating staff, they isolated maternal absence as the only major variable. They reduced environmental shock by arranging pre-separation visits and allowing children to bring familiar beds and toys. The substitute care was highly responsive, mirroring the child's routine as closely as possible to minimize any sense of change. The results showed that this optimized environment successfully prevented the severe deterioration into despair and detachment seen in the nurseries. However, the protest phase remained. Even with perfect care, older children still exhibited explicit yearning, sadness, and anger directed at their absent parents. After returning home, these children were more demanding, more defiant, and showed a persistent fear of being left again. In one case, a child named Kate suffered a severe asthma attack, triggered simply by her mother mentioning school enrollment, a situation the child perceived as a threat of another separation. While high-quality care can mitigate the intensity of the trauma, the core anxiety remains. This suggests that maternal absence itself is an independent pathogenic trigger. Proving this claim required even more precise data, moving from the home into a controlled laboratory setting. Mary Ainsworth set out to quantify exactly how the mother's presence, or lack of it, dictated a child's willingness to explore. In her Strange Situation Protocol, 56 one-year-olds were observed through an 8-episode sequence of micro-separations and reunions. In episode 2, the mother sits quietly in the room while the infant is free to play with toys. At this stage, infants explore actively and confidently, only checking back with the mother occasionally. But in episode 4, when the mother leaves the room and a stranger remains, the data shifts. Play and exploration stop. 39 out of the 56 infants began crying or searching the empty chair where the mother had been sitting. When the infant is left entirely alone in episode 6, the reaction intensifies. 54 out of the 56 infants showed intense distress, abandoning the toys to cry or bang on the doors. The most telling data point, however, came during the final reunion in episode 8. 42 of the infants clung to their mothers and resisted being put back down to play. Ainsworth's data suggests that separation distress is not a learned behavior or a reaction to a scary room. It is an autonomic behavioral system that immediately overrides the desire to explore. These studies challenged the long-held view that attachment was merely a byproduct of physiological drives, like hunger. Instead, separation anxiety appears to be a primary, evolutionary adaptation, a hardwired biological drive to maintain proximity to safety. Bowlby argued that the internal working models formed during these early separations could shape how an individual manages relationships for the rest of their life. He observed that the persistent, anxious demands of the protest phase shared striking characteristics with the behavior of adults later diagnosed with neurotic anxiety and overdependency. Similarly, the listlessness and regression seen in despair provided a clinical bridge to understanding the origins of adult depression, and the emotional blockage seen in detachment offered a prototype for affectionless or psychopathic personality disorders, where the capacity for deep connection has been suspended. By prioritizing prospective observation of actual children over the retrospective theories of the past, Bowlby and Ainsworth provided a new framework for psychology. They demonstrated that many adult dysfunctions are the biological echoes of a rational, evolutionary response to the loss of security.